Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Law&Crime Trial Network. I'm Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us. Today is the day one of the trial of Doomsday Cult mom Lori Vallow Daybell out of Idaho. This is the 49-year-old mother facing conspiracy and first-degree murder charges in connection with the deaths of her two children, 7-year-old J.J. Vallow and 16-year-old Tylee Ryan, as well as that of 49-year-old Tammy Daybell, the deceased wife of Lori's current husband, Chad Daybell. I should also say maybe co-defendant, because Chad is facing similar charges and will face a separate criminal trial at a later date. Now, why? Well, we have to remember that the bodies of these children were found on his property, and he's also charged with the actual murder of Tammy as well. Now, anyone who's been following our coverage of this case knows that this is usually the time I bring in Law&Crime correspondent Gigi McKelvey, who's been reporting from outside of the Ada County Courthouse for us. But as you can imagine, a lot of interest in this case. So Gigi had to go into that courthouse early to make sure to get a spot so she can see day one play out. No cameras allowed in that courtroom. Gigi has really been very much our eyes and ears throughout the process so far, and we're going to make sure to rely on her during the course of this trial. But let's talk about what we learned last week, and then I'll tell you what we can expect today. So last week was all about actually getting a jury. A potential pool of 1,800 jurors were finally whittled down to 18 jurors, 10 men, 8 women. That's 12 jurors, 6 alternates. You might be saying, why so many alternates? Well, the reason there are so many is because we believe this is going to possibly be an 8-week trial. Difficult subject matter, very high profile case, a lot of media attention. Things happen during the course of the trial. You lose jurors. There's always a concern that you lose jurors in these types of cases because it's such a long time and there's a lot that they go through. So that's why you need the alternates. Now, with day one comes the opening statements. And I'm going to tell you right now why the opening statements are so important and what we can expect. Opening statements, for anybody who's been following our cases, you already know this, but I'll refresh everybody's memory. They are, while not evidence, they provide the opportunity for both the prosecution and the defense to lay out their case, their narrative, their story. Remember, this is the first time that the jury is really hearing what this is all about. So it's important from the very start to grab the jury's attention and outline clearly what they can expect. First up, the prosecution. They have the burden of proof in this case. They usually go first. So they're going to outline the evidence against Lori Vallow Daybell. Now, I imagine they're going to create a direct tie between Lori and the murders. For the conspiracy to commit murder charges of the children and Tammy, the prosecutors are going to need to show that Lori entered into an agreement, presumably with Chad and maybe Alex Cox, her deceased brother, who perhaps actually carried out the physical murders, and her or another collaborator took overt steps in furtherance of that plot. And for the murder charges, for the children, they're going to need to show that Lori was a direct principal in the killings. That doesn't mean that she had to physically carry out the killings herself, as long as she had a direct role in it. And it seems to me that what they're going to do is highlight examples of Lori misleading family, friends, authorities about the whereabouts of her children, continually lying, even allegedly asking her friend to lie to police for her. That shows a consciousness of guilt. Now, we also have to remember that Lori is also charged with grand theft for illegally collecting government benefits after the death of her children. So I imagine in an opening statement, they're going to highlight that as well. Now, for the defense, they're going to do the complete opposite. They're going to need to raise instances of reasonable doubt. I imagine that what they're going to try to do is distance Lori from this as much as possible. We know that they've already put forward filings suggesting that Lori's alibi is she was nowhere near these crime scenes, that she was at her apartment when all of this went down. It seems to me that they're going to suggest that she doesn't know anything that happened, maybe put all of the blame on Chad and Alex, perhaps suggest that she was manipulated by them, lied to them by them, and that she didn't know the nature of what was actually happening. Now, particularly for Alex Cox, very easy to put the blame on someone who's no longer here to defend themselves. We've seen that happen in other trials before. And you also have to imagine that mental health and religion will be issues that come up as well throughout the course of this case as well, because you have to think, we believe that the prosecutors allege that these murders were fueled and carried out due to the couple's extreme religious beliefs. The defense may even suggest that Chad and Alex exploited Lori's mental vulnerability. So it's a complicated case with a lot of different factors, but that's what I expect is ultimately going to happen. But of course, Gigi, who we believe who is now in that courthouse. She's going to be later on this afternoon with more updates. But for now, we want to turn our attention to a different case. We're going to turn our attention to the Stepmom murder trial, which is entering its second week. And while we wait for today's proceedings to start up, we're going to go to the end of last week when Christopher Ganstein was on the stand. The sergeant at El Paso County Sheriff's Office conducted the surveillance operation on the defendant back in 2020. So let's get into that Colorado courtroom to see what he had to say.
So I could just let her know what was going on, that we had a warrant for the car and that I couldn't let her in and I need to get the keys. So I had gotten out of my car that time, and as she walked up to me, I'd approached her. Actually, I didn't really approach her. She had gotten there about the same time, right in between the two cars.
While that approach is happening, can you describe the defendant's demeanor?
She was surprised. So she kind of froze, and I said, "My name is Sergeant Ganstein with the Sheriff's Office. We have a search warrant for the vehicle. I can't let you into it. I'm going to need the keys." And basically, it was, like I said, it was a soft approach, just like I'm talking now. She didn't acknowledge me. She didn't say anything. Where she was, she had maneuvered kind of closer to her driver's door, and then just started slowly walking backwards.
Were there any observations that you noticed about her gaze or where she was looking, anything like that?
So the two biggest things I noticed is she was just stuttering, like one word, like key, warrant, like just repeating what I was saying. And then she kept walking further back, and I told her, I said, "Relax, you're not in trouble. I just need the keys to the car. I can't let you into it." She continued to walk back, and then I noticed she started to turn her head behind her, because when that was going on, so there's my vehicle, her vehicle, and I'm here, she's here, so she can't go past me, she can't go left or right. So all she can do is basically turn around, and so I noticed that she was periodically turning around as she continued to walk backwards.
As she walked backwards, what did she do after that?
She turned and ran in a full sprint away from me. She had the keys in her hand. I was like, okay. Got on the radio and I was like, she's running. Like, I don't know what's going on. And I started running after her. As she was running away from me, she had taken the keys to the car and threw them across the parking lot. It took us a little bit of time to find them. But she had thrown them across the parking lot, and so she threw them one way and then kept running the other way from where she threw the keys.
Ultimately, after running after her, were you able to make contact?
Yes, to the two vehicles that had the lights that we were going to have come in, they rolled in, they got out. One drew his firearm and gave her commands, and she had stopped and got on the ground at that time, and then I didn't know what was going on. So I went up and handcuffed her at that time and detained her until we could find out what was going on and what had happened. And then she was given to two other people that had taken her back to a car.
Okay. But to be clear, at that time, she was not being arrested, correct?
No.
Okay. While you were present on scene with other law enforcement members, where was Harley Hunt?
She was, when that happened, she was walking out of the Michaels pretty like within a minute of that happening, and then me detaining the defendant.
Okay. And with specifically as it relates to the approval of the search warrant for a cellular telephone, was that able to be gathered that day?
Yes. Initially, Harley was reluctant to give the phone. And so one of the detectives, she had it in her hand. One of the detectives just yanked it right out of her hand, so she couldn't manipulate or do anything with it.
Was there any interaction that you observed between the defendant and her daughter, Harley Hunt, while you were present on scene?
Yes. The defendant was fairly hysterical. She was screaming. She was yelling obscenities, things like that. Once she realized that we were also in contact with Harley, she started screaming at Harley, saying, "Don't say anything. Tell him you want an attorney. Don't talk to him." those type of statements. And we were trying to tell her we just need to get the phone.
And after obtaining the phone from Harley Hunt and securing Ms. Stauch, what did you do after that?
At that point, we had moved Harley because Harley started crying and she was fairly hysterical as well. But actually before that, I had talked to the defendant and I told her she needed to calm down. She's screaming. We're in a public parking lot. She's committing criminal acts and she doesn't need to get herself in trouble. So just to relax and calm down. And she did. Once I had that short conversation with her, she stopped yelling. And then we had moved Harley into the back of one of our patrol vehicles. We didn't close the door. We left the door open. And I just had a quick conversation with Harley to calm her down because she was crying and she was fairly hysterical.
Okay, and were you able to calm her down?
Yeah, I told her, hey, here's the deal. We needed to get the phone. I don't know what your mom just did, but we're fine now, and we're going to let you guys go.
Okay.
So.
And to be clear, up until that point, the defendant was not arrested. She was not. She didn't have any criminal summons or anything like that you provided to her, correct?
No, until we can secure the scene and find out exactly what the circumstances were behind the unusual reaction of me just trying to get car keys, given the scope of the investigation and its infancy, we didn't know if there was something more that we didn't know until we knew. So once we calmed everything down, got everyone calm, we released them because we've accomplished what we needed to do, which was to execute the 2 warrants.
And after obtaining the cellular telephone, is that telephone then made available or accessible in evidence for other law enforcement officers with access to?
It was given. We had multiple detectives from majors there from the sheriff's office, and it was given to them.
You talked a bit about your training experience and different things that you've observed over your career as a law enforcement officer. As it relates to this specific interaction with a defendant, would you describe whether or not she was suffering a mental crisis, mental disease or defect at that time?
So to get in, I've been a deputy for 19 years. I've had a lot of interactions, arrested a lot of people. And in terms of surveillance and a lot of that, when people are surprised by law enforcement, we've heard the term fight or flight. So people have to make 2 decisions when police tell them to do something. Number 1, am I going to do it? And if their answer is yes, we're done. If their answer is no, the second decision they need to make is, well, what am I going to do? Am I going to run or am I going to fight? And so those decisions have to be made. And in this particular interaction, based on the totality of hiding in the vehicle, taking steps to be covert, those are overt acts. Those aren't, subversive acts. And between that and then what we refer to as target glancing, which means when a person wants to run from us, or let's say they have a gun on them or whatever, a lot of times they'll actually look to see, they'll forecast where they're going to run. Because they'll be looking around, they're trying to find what their avenue of escape, and that's what they're going to do. Same thing if they have like a weapon on them, a lot of times they'll be touching it, or if they have a knife, we actually train that we see these things, and I've experienced those things through my 19-year career. So I saw the target glancing, and it was pretty evident when she was backing up and then started turning around that she was going to run. And I think that in my mind, those were conscious decisions that were made.
Okay. But specifically as it relates to observing a severe mental disease or defect while you were present on scene observing her, did you observe that?
I did not.
Pass the witness, Your Honor.
Cross-examination. Thank you. Good afternoon, Sergeant Ganstein. My name is Will Cook and I represent Ms. Stauch. I'm going to ask you a few questions. This encounter with Ms. Stauch and Harley Hunt, her daughter,